Hello, my name is Monster Half-Life, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Now, when The Adventures of Phaerimm was coming out, and they had revealed that they were coming out with a supplement called Netheril's Fall, both books stated that they were going to have stat blocks for the Phaerimm in it. Now, I was excited, because these are the monsters that supposedly helped take down the Netherese Empire. And looking at their older stat blocks, you could see why. These creatures were very tough to fight. So, imagine my disappointment when I opened up the stat blocks and they were almost nothing like how they were described. So what they could do in their older stat blocks is a lot. They could reflect and absorb magic in general, just in general. They could see magic just innately, as well as being able to see into the ethereal plane and the astral plane. They were practically immune to being petrified or polymorphed, and they had a pretty decent resistance against all other magics. They had magic that was able to let them charm people and warp their minds. They had magic that could drain the life out of anyone, including the earth itself, to the point where their civilization created the Anorok Desert. They had a stinger that could inject their foes with an egg and paralyze them as the egg hatched inside of them. That's really spooky. And they were also supposed to be spellcasters on par with the Netherese wizards. They weren't just chumps. So what does the stat block actually give? Well, does it give them the ability to reflect or absorb magic? Not really. The Elder gets the ability to absorb magic item charges, but that's about it. And they get magic resistance, which gives them advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects, but like most boss monsters get that anyways, so that's not that special. Well, do they get the ability to drain the life out of their opponents? No, not at all. Do they have abilities to warp the mind of their opponents and charm them? Kind of. The agent has the mind warp ray, which lets them charm people until the start of their next turn. And the Elder has the ability to cast command at 3rd level at will. But that's it. Not really. I mean, they have some illusion magic, but that can't really be cast in battle. Okay, well, are they good spellcasters at least? Are they on par with the Netherese wizards? Not really. They use their charisma to cast instead of their intelligence. And their intelligence is only a 17. So, no, they can't really do that either. Well, can they implant their opponents with their stinger and paralyze them? Not really. The stinger does do extra poison damage, and the Elder, when they hit you with the stinger, is able to reduce your speed to 0 until the start of their next turn, but it doesn't paralyze you, and certainly doesn't inject you with an egg. Well, what can they do then? I've pretty much given you everything they can do. Now, I'm going to split this video into a couple different sections. First, I'm going to go over what we're keeping from the stat blocks, because they do have some cool stuff. I don't think we should get rid of all of it. And then we'll be going over the changes that we'll be doing. First, we'll be doing the traits, such as their stats and their immunities and their regular traits like magic resistance. We're going to be going over that. We're going to be going over their actions and their spellcasting and what they can do there. And then we're going to be going over any legendary actions that the Elder might get. We'll be taking from 5 different stat blocks. The first stat block is obviously from the 5th edition Netheril's Fall, though we're not going to be taking too much from that, as we're going to be changing a lot of it. We'll be taking from Minsk and Boo's Journal of Villainy, as I think that this stat block is pretty representative of what the Phaerimm should be in 5th edition. We'll be taking some elements from their original AD&D stat block, as well as a tiny bit, not a lot, but a tiny bit from their 3rd edition stat block. And lastly, we're going to be taking from a third-party supplement called The Skies of Netheril, a setting guide to the Empire of Magic. As I do think 1 or 2 of their abilities are very good for a Phaerimm to have, and I don't really get why none of the other stat blocks thought of it. So, but I also wanted to credit the owner of that supplement, just because I'll be taking a little bit of their ideas. Now, without further ado, this is the Phaerimm Stat Block Revision by Monster Half-Life. So first we'll be going over what exactly we're going to be keeping from the Phaerimms. I think that we should keep their speed, first of all. The agent gets the ability to fly 40 feet at a hover speed, and they have a 10-foot ground speed. And the Elder has a 30-foot ground speed and a 60-foot hover speed. I think both of these are good, and I would personally keep them. I don't see a reason not to. Their saving throws, I think I would also keep, which are Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. So basically all the mental stats plus their Constitution for concentrating on spells. I'd keep all of those. It makes sense for them. They're more magic creatures that are supposed to be using magic, and so they'd be better at casting magic and resisting magic. As for their skills, I'd keep all their skills. They're an expert in Arcana, which makes sense because they're supposed to be on par with the Netherese wizards, and then they're proficient in Insight and Perception. Will you use this that much? Probably not, but I think it's always good to have on creatures, to have certain skills, just in case you end up doing something with them. For their immunities, I would personally keep the Phaerimm Elder's immunities of Charmed and Frightened. For some reason, the agent only gets immunity to Charmed, and then they grow into being immune to being frightened, but I would just make sure they're immune to frightened ahead of time, just so the party is used to these creatures being immune to certain things, especially as they grow older. Their True Sight, I would stay the same, because 120 feet of True Sight is amazing. It's nothing to sneeze at. As for their traits, we're sort of going to be keeping magic resistance. We're adding on to it. It's going to be magic resistance plus something else. But for all intents and purposes, we're keeping magic resistance, which means they have advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects, which makes sense. They're supposed to be resistant against spells in general, or at least being affected by them. So of course they'd have advantage on those saving throws. For their multi-attack, I'd keep the idea that they can attack 3 times. I'm not sure I don't think I would keep the Dread Stinger just because I think it's boring, but we're definitely keeping the Mind Warp Ray. It uses your Charisma to attack, though I'd switch that to Intelligence for reasons that I will explain in the next part. And it does 2d8 plus 4 psychic damage, and the target has the Charmed condition until the start of the Phaerimm's next turn. I think this is amazing. It makes sense that they'd have this, because they are creatures that are messing with others' minds to make them do their bidding. So of course they'd have a ray that lets them take over the mind of a creature in the short term with the Charmed effect. It makes sense, and I think they would keep doing it. As for their spellcasting, I would keep most of it. Of course we're going to be adding more, but the only one I'd get rid of is Detect Magic, for reasons, again, that will be explained in the next section. We're going to be keeping the bonus action Teleport, because being able to teleport 30 feet is amazing for anybody, and I think that you should be able to have the option to move around the battlefield a bit more. Lastly, I would keep their reaction, which is their Protective Magic. It's 3 times a day, and they can cast Counterspell or Shield in response to the spell's trigger, using the same spellcasting ability as, well, spellcasting. I would personally split this up into 2 things. I'd have 3 times a day Shield and 3 times a day Counterspell, but that's up to you. It doesn't particularly matter because you're probably not going to be lasting that long. Either way, those are the only things I'd keep from these stat blocks. We're going to be changing a lot about the Phaerimm, and we're going to be starting with the traits and their stats. We're going to be boosting 4 of their stats. We're going to be boosting their strength up to a 20, we're going to be boosting their intelligence up to a 23 because they're supposed to be the intellectual rivals of the Netherese wizards, who are the smartest wizards ever. They've learned the most magic, they learned about magic the most, and truthfully, they shouldn't be any dumber than 20. But we're going to give them a 23. We're going to make their wisdom a 20, up from 16, and we're going to make their charisma a 19, up from 18. So their strength, their intelligence, and their wisdom get stat boosts, while their charisma just gets a little number boost. We're also going to be switching their spellcasting from charisma to intelligence. As for other things that they get, we're going to be giving them immunity to petrification, simply because they're more resistant to being petrified in their old stat blocks, but there's no real way to show that in 5th edition, so they just become immune. Though, truthfully, it's not going to matter that much because there's only 2 spells that can petrify an opponent. Another thing about their traits is they're going to be getting their immutable form, which makes them immune to any spell or effects that would alter its form, basically making it immune to polymorph, which would also fall in line with the older stat blocks, which make them very resistant to being polymorphed. Another thing we're going to be giving them from Minsc and Boo's Journal of Villainy is their Arcane Sight, which lets them detect the location of any magical auras within sight, and they know which creatures within range are spellcasters. Now, we're going to be increasing that range, because in the original stat block, they can cast Detect Magic at will, which is within 30 feet, and Arcane Sight on the Minsc and Boo's Journal of Villainy stat block is 60 feet. I think we should be increasing that to 120 feet. It makes no sense that they would be able to see 120 feet and not be able to sense within 120 feet. They're creatures that can see magic a different way than other creatures. I think they should be able to see who's a spellcaster within 120 feet of them. Lastly, we're going to be changing magic resistance to be a bit more powerful. We're going to keep the fact that they have advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects, but we're going to be adding the fact that they can either absorb magic or they can reflect it. Now, for reflecting magic, that's pretty simple. If they succeed a saving throw against a spell or a spell attack misses, they can reflect it back at the caster who cast it at them. It's going to use the spellcaster's modifiers, so either their spell attack modifier or their spell save DC, and it'll affect them just as if they had failed or succeeded the saving throw. It's really simple. It's not much different. The absorption is going to be where we're going to run into a bit more complication. For what I would do with the absorption is that if the spell does damage, they absorb the damage, basically turning it into temporary HP. Now, why not have them heal? Well, they're going to have another option to heal themselves with anyways, and I think temporary HP would make more sense for 5th edition than regular HP. But they'll either get the damage back in temporary HP, or if it doesn't do damage, I would have them get the spell level times 5 amount of temporary HP. It makes the casters a bit less willing to just throw spells out there if the Phaerimm can absorb them. The Phaerimm, we're changing their actions a lot. They're going to have 3 attacks using the Mind Warp Ray or their Dread Stinger normally, but we're going to be changing that a little bit. We're going to be changing it to either do 3 Mind Warp Rays or 3 Claw attacks, because their Stinger is going to be a once a turn type of thing, because it's very powerful with what we're going to be able to do with it. The Mind Warp Ray, upgrading for the Phaerimm Elder from the Phaerimm Agent, is going to do 4d8 plus 6 psychic damage, have a plus 11 to hit, and it's still going to charm. The reason that we're lowering the damage from Mind Lash's 68 plus 4 is because, well, the Mind Warp Ray still charms an opponent when it hits. Mind Lash doesn't do that, so I don't think we should have the damage of Mind Lash and a charm effect, so we're going to lower the damage a little bit. And it still gets boosted a little bit because of their increased intelligence, which we are going to be using instead of charisma, because they are spellcasters that learned how to cast their spells. As for their claw attacks, it's going to be a +10 to hit. I'm going to have it do 3d6 plus 5 piercing damage, and it's going to automatically grapple you with a DC of 15 to escape the grapple. And it can grapple up to 4 people at a time because they can fly and they have 4 arms. It'll make it a bit easier to either drop your opponent from the sky or hold them for their vicious stinger attack. Now, normally this is just called the stinger attack, but I'd have it be the vicious stinger because I kind of like that name. It's going to be a +10 to hit instead of a +9, and it's going to do 2d6 plus 5 piercing damage instead of 2d6 plus 4, and it does 4d12 poison damage. But instead of reducing your speed to 0 until the start of the Phaerimm's next turn, I'm just going to have it poison you, because it's slowly working into your body. Now, at the end of the target's next turn, they're going to make a DC 17 Constitution saving throw against the poison. We're using the strength stat for this, so that's why it's DC 17. On a success, they're not poisoned anymore, and they don't have to worry about that. But if they fail, they're going to get paralyzed. And you'll see why. Because if they're paralyzed, they can use their vicious stinger again to try and implant an egg into the opponent. If it hits, it implants the egg, and they take a penalty to a lot. They're going to take a -4 to their attack rolls, their armor class, their ability, and their ability scores. Why? Well, they have an egg that's causing them immense pain. Now, they can keep making their Constitution saving throw against being paralyzed until they succeed. I'll either have it do that or it lasts a minute. Either or, it's not going to last for the rest of their lives. In the Minsk and Booze Journal to Villainy stat block, they say that you can just cure the egg with a lesser restoration. But I think that's lame, especially now that lesser restoration is only a bonus action. So instead, I'm going to have you either use an action to use greater restoration, because this is a very tough thing to cure, or after the battle, if you spend a minute, you can make a DC 20 medicine check to try and remove the egg with surgery. This is also in line with the AD&D stat block, as you were able to do this to try and get the egg out without magic. Now, if you fail, I'd have you do a bit of damage to the person, probably like 2d6 damage, but you can try again. And the egg is going to be in the person for 1d6 days. After the 1d6 days, it's going to hatch and kill the person that it was inside. So you want to get the egg out pretty quickly. The last thing I'm going to do, or at least talk about, is their siphon magic. I'm getting rid of that because I think it's too weak. Instead, we're going to be using the Drain Weapon ability from Skies of Netheril, the third-party supplement I was talking about. I think both of these options are very effective, and it makes sense for what the Phaerimm can do. Recharge on a 5 or a 6, and they can do a 60-foot cone for both of these. Their Life Drain lets each creature in that area make a DC 19 Constitution saving throw, or they take 16d6 necrotic damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. The Phaerimm then regains 10 HP for each creature damaged in this way. So that's why I was saying that their absorption ability with their trait would give them temporary HP instead of regular HP, because they do have a way to heal themselves, and it's a pretty big way also. As for their magic drain, it normally lets you consume magic in a 60-foot cone, and each spellcaster in the area must make a DC 19 charisma saving throw, or they take 16d6 force damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. And until the end of the Phaerimm's next turn, the affected area acts as an anti-magic field. Now, I'm going to change that one just a little bit because I think it should be able to damage more people. I would have anyone with a magic item in general have to make the charisma saving throw or take damage. And if they have a magic item that has charges, if they fail that saving throw, it also absorbs their charges. So it keeps the siphon magic ability around, but it actually does a bit more. Now, we are going to be adding to their spellcasting, but that's going to be a separate section because we're adding a lot, and I don't want this section to get too long. For the spellcasting, we're going to be keeping almost everything the Elder has except Detect Magic because, well, Arcane Sight makes Detect Magic obsolete, right? Command is a pretty good at-will spell to use, and I think the ability to replace one of your attacks with the ability to cast Command is a pretty good idea. And it also makes you choose between using the Stinger or a spell. Major Image is probably going to be the only once a day that you're going to be using from this original list in combat because it takes an action. Clairvoyance and Mirage Arcana both take 10 minutes to cast, and Gaius takes 1 minute to cast. So all of those you're not going to be casting in battle. And Detect Thoughts and Mage Hand are also not battle spells, but they're still good to have, especially outside of combat. As for the spells that I would add, it's a lot. There's a lot of spells I would add. I would add Minor Illusion for an at-will spell, as well as Telekinesis. Telekinesis makes sense because these are monsters that do things with magic, so they're probably also moving objects with magic. They don't want to use their hands to move stuff unless they absolutely have to. As for their 3 times a day, I would add Dominate Person, Fear, Fireball, Phantasmal Force, and Magic Missile. Dominate Person, Fear, and Phantasmal Force are all spells that mess with the opponent's mind, either by charming them or putting them into some sort of illusion. Fireball is good for just magic damage. Everybody likes a fireball. And Magic Missile is good to break the concentration of any wizards. They've been fighting wizards for thousands of years. They'd know the same tactics as players do, which is use Magic Missile on someone that's concentrating something to make them consistently roll against a concentration check. As for what I would add for once-a-day spells, I would add Chain Lightning, Confusion, Dominate Monsters, Greater Invisibility, Hold Monsters, Mass Suggestion, and Reverse Gravity. Chain Lightning is a good opener for damage spells because it does a ton of damage to a lot of different people. Confusion, Dominate Monster, and Mass Suggestion are all spells that, again, mess with the opponent's mind. They just mess with it a little harder. Great Invisibility is good for sneaking around, especially because Great Invisibility doesn't drop when you attack someone. So it's also good for avoiding a lot of spells, because while they still have advantage on saving throws against them and they can reflect them, they still take full damage if they fail. So they want to keep every advantage that they have. Lastly, there's Reverse Gravity, which I think makes sense for them because they were fighting against the Netherese, who made their cities float. So of course they'd have a more localized version of that spell, as well as being able to attack opponents who are off balance, because the Phaerimm can fly, their opponents cannot. One thing I did forget, and apologies for that, is Hold Monster, which paralyzes the opponent. Now, why does this matter? Well, if you're able to get that Hold Monster off, you can use your Sting to implant an egg ahead of time. You don't have to poison your opponent to do it. You can just implant the egg, and then they'll take the -4 penalty to a lot of their stats. But that's only if they want to really speed up that process. As for downgrading to the Phaerimm agent from the Elder Phaerimm, I would take away Chain Lightning, Mass Suggestion, and Reverse Gravity from the once a day list, and move Fireball from 3 times a day to once a day, because Fireball is still a pretty big damaging spell, so you're going to want to keep it relatively equal to the players, but that's up to your discretion. As for legendary actions for the Elder Phaerimm, it's pretty simple. For one legendary action, I would give him the ability to make a claw attack. Now, I'm going to say claw attack and not the Mind Warp Ray, because Mind Warp Ray is already powerful. It's doing a lot of damage, and it's charming people without a saving throw. So I wouldn't want you to be able to do that outside of your turn, simply because you could charm the whole party before they're able to really do anything, if you could do it as a legendary action. As their second legendary action, I'd let them teleport. I would increase the teleport from 30 feet from the bonus action one to 60 feet, just simply because it makes sense for it to be 60 feet with a legendary action versus 30 feet as a bonus action. Lastly, I would let them cast a spell using 2 legendary actions. Now, you can use this strategically, like you can have them cast Hold Monster right before their turn to try and paralyze someone, so you can stinger them to try and inject them with an egg next turn, or something along those lines. You could do damage with the fireball. You could try to use confusion to confuse someone when it's not their turn, or really any other types of options. There's a lot of options to choose from. But that's it for legendary actions. And that's the end of the video. Now, truthfully, I did this because I've been making homebrew adjustments to monsters for as long as I've been a dungeon master. I've played the 2014 version of the game since about 2016. And one thing I've noticed pretty consistently was that the monsters were too weak for the players. The players were very powerful, and the monsters were just swamped every time the players would fight them. I'd have to give the monsters more HP, more damaging stuff, more minions, more everything. When the guide said, oh, this monster can take on a party of players by itself. When the 2024 version came out, one of the things that I thought was really neat was that the monsters were actually scaled up to be threats. These monsters could kill your players. They could do more damage. They were very tough monsters. And so when I heard that the Phaerimm were going to be introduced in 2024, I was excited, because the Phaerimm probably couldn't have been made in 2014, truthfully, because these monsters are very deadly. They're very destructive. Now, of course, there was the monster from Minsk and Boo's Journal of Villainy, but not everyone can see that, as that's not a quote-unquote like mainline D&D book. So having the Phaerimm introduced in mainline D&D, I was excited. But obviously I was very disappointed in the stat block. It doesn't give any indication of the things that it can do, even in the lore. They didn't retcon the fact that the Phaerimm's magic turned the Anauroch Desert from a beautiful lush land into a desert. But there's nothing to indicate that they can do that in their own stat blocks. So, obviously, I wanted to make them more like their counterparts, their AD&D counterparts. And that's the reason I didn't make a typical how to run this monster video. Because at the point to how much I was adding, it was an entirely different stat block. And it would have been how to run my homebrew stat block versus how to run these monsters as they're presented in 2024, with a few homebrew suggestions, right? It would have been completely different. And I'm not going to be doing a video on how to run the base stat blocks of the Phaerimm, because I think they're just so disappointing versus like what they should be. But if you enjoyed this video, let me know if you'd like more of this type of video, trying to look into monsters and really giving them a makeover to make them what they should be in lore versus what they might be in the stat blocks. But even if I don't do something like this again, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'd like you to like, comment, and subscribe, and thank you for watching.